The artillery fire tore through the night sky like heaven splitting open. Commander Jake Reeves pressed himself against the frozen rock face, his breath forming clouds in the sub-zero air. Around him, 32 SEAL operators huddled in whatever cover they could find behind boulders, in shallow depressions, beneath the skeletal remains of a burned-out truck. They were trapped. 3 days ago, the mission had been straightforward: infiltrate the Corondor Valley, gather intelligence on enemy supply routes, and extract before dawn. But intelligence had failed them. The valley wasn't a supply route. It was a staging ground for the largest offensive operation the enemy had mounted in 18 months. And now, with their exfil compromised and their satellite link down, Reeves and his team were pinned in a kill box with 3 enemy generals orchestrating their destruction from elevated positions. "Sir, we've got movement on the western ridge," Lieutenant Marcus Webb called out, his voice barely audible over the thunder of incoming mortars. "At least 2 companies moving to flank." Reeves pulled up the tactical display on his wrist computer, though he already knew what it would show. 3 red markers pulsed on the surrounding heights. General Dmitry Volkov commanding the artillery from the northern peak, General Hassan Nazari directing the infantry assault from the eastern plateau, and General Yuri Konstantin coordinating air support from the western ridge. Each position was fortified, heavily guarded, and positioned with perfect overlapping fields of fire. It was a masterpiece of military execution. Reeves would have admired it if he wasn't about to die because of it. "We need air support," Webb said, crawling closer through the gravel. "Where's our extraction?" 40 minutes out, Reeves replied, his jaw tight. "We don't have 40 minutes. The mortars were walking closer, each explosion sending shrapnel singing through the air. Already, they'd lost 3 men. Anderson with a gut wound that no amount of quick clot could fix, Martinez with his legs turned to hamburger, and Thompson, who'd simply ceased to exist when a 120mm round landed 2 feet from his position. Reeves looked at his remaining operators. Young faces, old eyes, men who'd survived Ramadi and Helmand and the Syrian hellscape. Men who deserved better than bleeding out in this forgotten valley, because politicians had sent them on a mission with faulty intelligence. "Commander." The voice was quiet, almost lost in the chaos. "I can take the shot." Reeves turned. Standing behind him, somehow having appeared without a sound, was Staff Sergeant Lena Hart. She was small, 5'6" in boots, with dark blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, and gray eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. She'd been attached to his unit 3 weeks ago, a last-minute addition from some program he'd never heard of. Her file was sparse, mostly redacted, with a red flag notation that made most commanders refuse her outright. Reeves had taken her because he was short a designated marksman, and because he didn't have time to argue with personnel. He'd regretted it ever since. "What shot?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he wasn't interested. Hart pointed at the tactical display. "The 3 generals. If we eliminate them simultaneously, their command structure collapses. The artillery loses coordination. Infantry loses direction. We have a window to break through." Reeves stared at her. For a moment, he wondered if the cold had gotten to her. "Hart, those positions are between 1.8 and 2.2 kilometers away. There's a 20-knot crosswind with random gusts up to 30. Temperature is -15 Celsius. Visibility is less than 50%. And even if conditions were perfect, you'd need to drop all 3 in under 30 seconds before they realize they're under fire and scramble." 26 seconds, Hart corrected. "I'll need 26 seconds. No one can make that shot," Reeves said flatly. "I've seen Olympic-level marksmen fail at half that distance in controlled conditions." Hart's expression didn't change. She simply began unpacking her rifle case, a custom Macmillan TAC-50 with a Schmidt & Bender scope and a suppressor that added another 8 inches to the barrel length. Reeves watched her methodical movements, the way her fingers traced each component like a pianist preparing for a concert. "You don't understand," he said, grabbing her shoulder. "This isn't a training exercise. If you miss, if you alert them to our position, they'll drop everything they have on us. You'll kill us all." Finally, Hart looked at him. Her eyes were cold, distant, like she was already somewhere else. "If I don't shoot, Commander, everyone here dies anyway. At least this way, we have a chance." A mortar exploded 30 meters away, showering them with frozen dirt. Someone screamed a short, sharp sound that cut off too quickly. Reeves felt the calculation running through his mind, the terrible mathematics of combat leadership. Stay put and die slowly, or gamble everything on an impossible shot from a sniper he didn't trust. "Why should I believe you can do this?" he demanded. Hart shouldered her rifle, checking the action. "Because 3 years ago, I was the best sniper in the United States military, and I've spent every day since then making sure that what happened then never happens again." Before Reeves could respond, she was moving low and fast toward the southern edge of their perimeter, where a rocky outcrop offered a route up to Blackstone Ridge, the highest point in the valley, the most exposed position imaginable. "Hart!" Reeves called, but she was already gone, swallowed by the darkness and smoke. He looked at Webb, whose young face was tight with fear. Did she just say she was the best sniper in the military? Her files flagged red, Reeves said quietly. "Something about a failed mission. Classified. I don't know the details." "So we're trusting our lives to a cashiered sniper with a death wish?" Reeves didn't answer. He was watching the small figure disappearing into the rocks, carrying humanity's last hope in a rifle case on her back. Lena Hart's hands didn't shake as she climbed, though they should have. The cold was brutal, seeping through her tactical gloves and making each handhold an agony. But pain was distant, almost abstract. She'd learned to compartmentalize it during her 2 years in the Ghost Eye program, the Pentagon's classified initiative to create the most lethal precision marksman in modern warfare. She'd been 24 when they recruited her, fresh off a tour in Afghanistan where she'd racked up 47 confirmed kills and earned a reputation as the Pale Ghost. The name had come from insurgents who swore she appeared and disappeared like morning mist, leaving only bodies in her wake. Ghost Eye had promised to make her something more than human. And for a while, it had succeeded. The program's training was beyond brutal. 18 months of ballistic physics, meteorology, advanced mathematics, and psychology. They taught her to calculate windage in her head, to account for Coriolis effect at extreme range, to read terrain and weather patterns like a second language. They pushed her to make shots that shouldn't be possible. 2,000 meters, 2,500 meters, and finally, a record-breaking 2,847-meter kill that made her the program's star graduate. Then came Operation Nightfall. Lena's breathing hitched just for a second as the memory tried to surface. She crushed it back down, focusing on the climb. Hand over hand, boot wedged in crack, pull, step, breathe. Don't think about Syria. Don't think about the safe house. Don't think about Jackson and Morrison and Keller and... A chunk of rock broke away under her boot. She slipped, caught herself on a narrow ledge, her rifle case swinging out over empty space. For a moment, she hung there, 300 feet of nothing beneath her boots. Then she pulled herself up, muscles screaming, and continued climbing. 30 meters ahead, a narrow path cut across the cliff face. She could see it in the green glow of her night vision. A goat track, maybe, or an old smuggler's route. It would take her to Blackstone Ridge, the obsidian outcrop that dominated the valley like a broken tooth. A sound made her freeze. Voices, speaking in rapid Dari. She killed her night vision and pressed herself against the rock, becoming part of the stone. 2 enemy scouts passed below, flashlights cutting through the smoke. They were searching for flanking SEAL positions, trying to locate weak points in the American defense. They never looked up. When their voices faded, Lena resumed climbing. Her mind drifted back to the question Commander Reeves hadn't asked but should have. Why was she here? Why would a sniper with her record end up attached to a SEAL team as an afterthought? The answer was simple. After Operation Nightfall, after the inquiry and the closed-door hearings and the classified report that would never see daylight, she'd been quietly removed from Ghost Eye. Not dishonorably discharged, that would have raised too many questions. Just reassigned. Shuffled from unit to unit, never staying long enough to form connections, always marked by that red flag in her file. Failed to protect her team. Judgment compromised. Not recommended for operational deployment. The words had haunted her for 3 years. Because they were true, she'd been so focused on the primary target, a high-value terrorist financier, that she'd missed the secondary team moving to flank her spotters. By the time she'd realized what was happening, Jackson was already dead, Morrison was bleeding out, and Keller was screaming into the radio for evac that would arrive 6 minutes too late. 3 good soldiers dead because she'd been too obsessed with making an impossible shot. Now, here she was again. Another impossible shot. Another chance to get good people killed. The difference was, this time, if she failed, she'd die with them. Lena hauled herself over the final ledge and onto Blackstone Ridge. The wind hit her like a physical force, howling across the exposed stone with enough power to stagger her. She dropped prone, using the rifle case as a windbreak, and surveyed her position. Perfect, terrible, both. She had clear lines of sight to all 3 enemy command positions. General Volkov's artillery bunker to the north 1,847 meters. General Nazari's command post on the eastern plateau 2,089 meters. General Konstantin's mobile headquarters on the western ridge 2,214 meters. The longest shot she'd ever attempted in combat conditions had been 2,100 meters, and that was in daylight with a spotter. This was different. This was impossible. Good, Lena thought. Impossible is what I'm here for. She began unpacking her rifle, each movement mechanical, practiced 1,000 times. The TAC-50 came together like a deadly puzzle receiver. Barrel, scope, suppressor. She'd modified the weapon extensively during her years in exile, adding a custom trigger group that broke at exactly 2 pounds, a barrel harmonic tuner that minimized vibration, and a scope with her own ballistic computer integrated into the reticle. As she worked, an enemy drone buzzed overhead. She didn't move, didn't breathe. The obsidian rock absorbed heat, making her nearly invisible to thermal imaging. The drone circled twice, then moved on toward the SEAL positions below. Lena finished assembling the rifle and pulled out her rangefinder. She began taking measurements, calculating angles, recording wind speed and direction at 3-second intervals. The wind was the real enemy here. It swirled unpredictably, funneled by the valley walls into chaotic eddies that could push a bullet 3 feet off course. She would get 1 chance at each target, maybe 2 if she was fast and lucky. 3 shots in 26 seconds, because that's how long it would take for the enemy command structure to realize they were under attack and scatter. Lena settled into her final firing position, the rifle stock tight against her shoulder, her eye behind the scope. She could see General Volkov through the reticle, surrounded by his staff, pointing at a map, a hard target, but not impossible. To his left, a lieutenant colonel. To his right, 2 majors. If she missed Volkov and hit one of them, the mission would fail. She shifted to Nazari. Easier shot, less wind, but he was moving constantly, pacing back and forth while barking orders into a radio. She'd have to time the shot perfectly, catching him in mid-stride. Finally, Konstantin, the hardest target. Not only was he the farthest away, but his position was partially shielded by a concrete barrier. She could see his head and shoulders, nothing more. A 4-inch target at 2,214 meters, in shifting wind. At night, Lena closed her eyes and took 3 deep breaths, centering herself. She thought about Jackson, who'd taught her to read wind by watching grass blow. About Morrison, who'd made her practice breathing exercises until she could slow her heart rate to 40 beats per minute. About Keller, who told her the night before he died that she was the best sniper he'd ever worked with. "This is for you," she whispered. Then she opened her eyes and began to hunt. Commander Reeves stared at his tactical display, watching red icons multiply like a cancer spreading across the screen. The enemy had committed everything: infantry, armor, air support. This wasn't just an ambush anymore. This was an extermination. "Sir, we've got T-72 seconds moving up the valley road," Webb reported, his voice cracking slightly. 4 of them. They'll have direct fire on our position in 3 minutes. Reeves looked at his remaining ammunition. 6 AT-4 seconds, maybe enough to stop 2 tanks if they got lucky. The others would turn this rocky outcrop into a graveyard. He thought about ordering a scatter, telling each team to make their own way out. But the enemy had cut off every exit route. They'd have to punch through at least 2 company strength positions, and his men were already exhausted, low on ammunition, and demoralized by watching friends die. There was no good option, just degrees of bad. "Alpha team, shift to the southern perimeter," he ordered. "Bravo, reinforce the..." The artillery suddenly stopped. The silence was so abrupt, so complete, that for a moment Reeves thought he'd gone deaf. Around him, SEALs looked up from their positions, confused. The mortars had been falling continuously for the past 30 minutes, and now, nothing. "What the hell?" Webb muttered. Reeves expanded his display, trying to understand what was happening. The enemy positions were still active. He could see infantry movement, vehicles repositioning, but the artillery had gone silent, and the infantry assault had slowed, as if waiting for orders. Orders that weren't coming. His radio crackled. "Commander Reeves." Hart's voice, calm and cold. "I'm in position, preparing to engage. Recommend your team, be ready to move in 30 seconds. Reeves felt his stomach clench. She was actually going to try it. This small woman he barely knew, with a red-flagged file and a history of failure, was about to attempt 3 impossible shots that would either save them all or sign their death warrants. "Hart, wait," he said into the radio. "We need to." "No time for discussion, sir. First shot in 10 seconds. Keep your heads down." The radio went silent. Reeves looked at Webb. "Get everyone ready to move. If she pulls this off, we'll have maybe 2 minutes of confusion before their secondary commanders take over. And if she doesn't, then we die a little faster than we would have anyway." Webb nodded and began moving through the positions, whispering orders. SEALs checked weapons, tightened gear, prepared to move. Some prayed. Others just stared at the sky, waiting for the end to come. Reeves pulled up a feed from their last functioning drone, barely airborne at 200 feet. He rotated the camera until he found Blackstone Ridge, a dark spike of rock against the slightly less dark sky. He couldn't see Hart, even with thermal imaging. She'd positioned herself in a fold of obsidian that made her nearly invisible. Professional, he thought. Whatever else she is, she's professional. The seconds ticked by. 5, 10, 15. Nothing happened. Reeves felt doubt creeping in. Maybe she'd realized it was impossible. Maybe she'd retreated. Maybe the first shot was so quiet it was almost lost in the wind. Just a soft crack, like a branch breaking. Reeves wouldn't have noticed it, except for what happened next. On his display, the Northern Command Post, General Volkov's artillery position suddenly went dark. The radio chatter that had been coordinating the bombardment cut off mid-sentence. Then came shouting, confusion, voices overlapping as officers tried to figure out what had happened. "Holy shit," Webb breathed. "She got him." Before anyone could process this, there was a second shot. This one, Reeves heard clearly, a sharp supersonic crack echoing off the valley walls. On the display, the eastern plateau erupted into chaos. Infantry units that had been advancing in perfect formation suddenly stopped, milling around without direction. General Nazari was dead. "2 down," Reeves said, his voice hollow with disbelief. 1 to go. The enemy was starting to realize they were under attack. Officers were shouting orders, trying to locate the sniper. Machine guns began raking Blackstone Ridge, tracer rounds lighting up the night sky. But Hart's position was too good, too concealed. The bullets sparked harmlessly off the obsidian, never coming close. Reeves counted seconds. 21, 22, 23. "Come on, Hart. Finish it." 24, 25. On the western ridge, General Konstantin had realized the danger. He was moving, diving for cover, his bodyguards forming a human shield around him. He was going to make it. He was going to... The third shot came exactly 26 seconds after the first. Through the drone feed, Reeves saw Konstantin jerk and fall, his bodyguards catching his limp body. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the western ridge dissolved into pandemonium. Officers ran in every direction. The tanks that had been moving to flank stopped, their commanders unsure whether to advance or retreat. Infantry units froze, waiting for orders that would never come. The entire enemy command structure was collapsing. "Move!" Reeves bellowed into his radio. "All teams, break for the southern pass! Go! Go! Go!" His SEALs erupted from cover like a dam breaking, sprinting through the smoke and darkness toward the one gap in the enemy lines, a narrow pass between 2 ridges that had been lightly defended because the enemy assumed the Americans were already beaten. As Reeves ran, half carrying a wounded operator, he kept thinking, no one can make that shot, no one. But someone just did. Lena's world had contracted to a circle of glass. Through her scope, she could see General Volkov clearly, despite the distance. He was a large man, heavy-set, with a thick beard going gray. He stood with his back to her, one hand on a map table, the other holding a radio to his ear. Around him, junior officers scurried like insects, bringing reports, awaiting orders. She would kill him first because he was the easiest shot. Wind was 12 knots from the northeast, steady. No significant thermal layers between her and the target, just distance and darkness, and the unforgiving mathematics of ballistics. Lena adjusted her scope's elevation, dialing in 31.2 milliradians. She made micro-adjustments for windage 2.1 milliradians left to compensate for the crosswind. Her breathing slowed, heart rate dropped. The world became quiet, except for the sound of her own pulse, steady and slow. She thought about nothing, felt nothing, became nothing but the shot itself. The crosshairs settled on the base of Volkov's skull, just where the spine met the brainstem. An instant kill. No possibility of survival even with body armor. Lena took up the trigger slack. The TAC-50's custom trigger was set to break at exactly 2 pounds. She applied pressure gradually, smoothly, her finger more suggestion than force. The rifle fired. The suppressor reduced the sound to a sharp crack, but recoil slammed into her shoulder like a mule kick. The TAC-50 chambered in. 50 BMG, and even with a muzzle brake, it was a violent weapon. But Lena rode the recoil, letting it flow through her body rather than fighting it. By the time the rifle settled, she was already working the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, and chambering a new round. Through the scope, she saw Volkov drop like a puppet with cut strings. His officers stood frozen for exactly 2 seconds, trying to process what had happened. Then chaos erupted. No time to watch. Lena swung the rifle to her second target, General Nazari, 2,089 meters away on the eastern plateau. The wind had shifted during her first shot, now gusting to 18 knots with random bursts to 25. She could see it in the way smoke drifted, in the way the tents around Nazari's position rippled. This would be harder. Nazari was pacing, agitated, barking orders into 2 radios simultaneously. He was smaller than Volkov, wiry and quick. In the scope's green glow, she could see his sharp features, the distinctive scar running down his left cheek. He moved in a pattern 3 steps forward, turn, 2 steps back, turn, repeat. Lena tracked him through 1 complete cycle, timing his movements. She would have a 0.7-second window when he paused at the turn. That was her shot. She adjusted for the increased wind, dialing in 4.2 milliradians of hold-off. The math was automatic now. Years of training compressed into instinct. Distance, wind speed, temperature, humidity, Coriolis effect. 1,000 variables resolved into a single point in space where bullet and target would meet. Nazari completed his pattern. Turned, paused. Lena fired. This time she watched the trace. The faint distortion in the air as the .50 caliber round cut through atmosphere at 2,800 feet per second. It took 2.3 seconds to reach the target, an eternity in combat. She saw Nazari's head snap back, saw the spray of matter, saw him collapse. 2 down, 21 seconds elapsed. Her hands were steady as she worked the bolt again, but somewhere deep in her mind, a small voice whispered, "You're not going to make it. The 3rd shot is impossible." She told the voice to shut up and swung the rifle to General Konstantin's position. The western ridge was 2,214 meters away, the absolute limit of her weapon's effective range. But distance wasn't the only problem. Konstantin had been smart. His mobile command post was partially shielded by a blast barrier, leaving only a narrow gap. Through her scope, Lena could see slivers of movement. A shoulder, part of a head, a hand holding a radio. Then Konstantin made a mistake. He stepped out from behind the barrier, moving to a map table to trace something with his finger. For exactly 3 seconds, he was exposed. 3 seconds wasn't enough. Lena needed to calculate wind drift, make her final adjustments, control her breathing, and take the shot. It would take at least 5 seconds, probably 6. By the time she was ready, Konstantin would be back behind the barrier, and the window would be gone. Unless... Lena's mind raced through the calculations. The wind at her position was gusting northeast, but the valley created a Venturi effect, accelerating wind through the narrow pass. By the time her bullet reached Konstantin's elevation, the wind would be different, stronger, more erratic. She could try to calculate it, account for every variable. Or she could do something crazy. She could aim for where Constantine would be, not where he was. It was a violation of every rule of sniping. You never predicted target movement at extreme range. Too many variables, too much risk. But Lena had watched Constantine through her scope for the past 30 seconds. She knew his pattern. He would examine the map for 2 seconds, then step back behind the barrier. If she fired now, while he was still partially concealed, the bullet would arrive exactly when he stepped back into the open. Probably. Maybe. It was insane. But she was out of time. Already, she could hear the enemy starting to triangulate her position. Machine gun fire was stitching across the rocks below her. In another 30 seconds, they'd figure out exactly where she was, and then it would be over. Lena didn't think. Thinking would make her hesitate. Instead, she let instinct take over, the instinct that had been drilled into her over thousands of hours of training, hundreds of shots, dozens of kills. She aimed at empty space, at where Constantine would be in 2.4 seconds. Her finger found the trigger. The world held its breath. She fired. The rifle kicked. The suppressor hissed. The bullet left the barrel at 2,812 feet per second and began its long journey through the cold night air. Lena watched through the scope as the bullet crossed 500 meters. 1,000 meters. 1,000. 500 meters. The wind caught it, pushed it left. She'd accounted for that. What she hadn't accounted for was a sudden gust that hit at 1,800 meters, shoving the round 6 inches right. Too far. She'd missed. But then she saw Constantine step backward from the map table, moving exactly as she'd predicted. The bullet that should have missed him by 6 inches instead caught him in the chest, slightly right of center mass. He staggered, fell. Third shot. 26 seconds total. Impossible. For a moment, Lena just lay there, stunned by what she'd just done. 3 generals, 3 different distances, 3 perfect shots, one of which should not have worked. Then training reasserted itself. She had approximately 30 seconds before enemy artillery realized where she was and turned Blackstone Ridge into rubble. She needed to move. Now, Lena broke down her rifle with the speed of long practice, shoving components into the case. She rolled left just as a burst of machine gun fire tore through the position where she'd been lying. Rock chips sprayed her face, drawing blood. She ran. Behind her, the first artillery round hit Blackstone Ridge, turning the obsidian outcrop into a volcano of shattered stone. But Lena was already gone, sliding down the backside of the ridge on a scree slope, using gravity and desperation to put distance between herself and the impact zone. She had to reach the SEAL team, had to make sure her impossible shots hadn't been for nothing, had to prove that this time, she could save them. Commander Reeves watched the small figure emerge from the smoke and darkness, moving with a stumbling, exhausted gait that was nothing like the fluid precision she displayed before. Hart was covered in rock dust, blood trickling from cuts on her face, her rifle case clutched against her chest like a shield. She'd made it. Somehow, through enemy fire and artillery strikes and sheer impossible luck, she'd made it back. "Cover her!" Reeves shouted, and his SEALs laid down, suppressing fire, driving back the confused enemy infantry that was still trying to figure out what had happened to their leadership. Hart collapsed next to him behind a boulder, gasping for air. Her eyes were wild, unfocused, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd pushed themselves beyond all reasonable limits. "The Valley Pass is open," she managed between gasps. "Enemy. Command structure. Collapsed. You have maybe 2 minutes before. Secondary commanders. Take control." Reeves stared at her. "You just made 3 impossible shots at over 2,000 meters in combat conditions. How the hell?" Later, Hart interrupted. She was already moving again, despite obvious exhaustion. Need to move. Now. She was right. Already, Reeves could hear enemy officers shouting, trying to restore order. The confusion wouldn't last long. He keyed his radio. "All teams, advance to the southern pass. Suppressing fire on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark." The night exploded with gunfire as his SEALs laid down everything they had. Under that cover, they moved carrying wounded, dragging equipment, sprinting through gaps in the enemy lines. Hart moved with them, rifle reassembled, providing precision fire that dropped any enemy officer trying to organize resistance. They reached the pass just as enemy artillery found their range again. Shells screamed overhead, detonating behind them, but they were through, into the narrow defile that would take them to the extraction zone. Reeves ran beside Hart, watching her move. She was operating on pure willpower now, her face gray with exhaustion. But she never stopped, never complained. When a young SEAL stumbled with a wounded leg, she was there, hauling him up, half carrying him through the pass. It took them 23 minutes to reach the extraction zone, a flat stretch of valley floor where helicopters could land. By the time they arrived, enemy pursuit was close behind, small arms fire snapping through the air. "Set up a perimeter," Reeves ordered. "We hold here until extract arrives." His men formed a defensive circle, returning fire at the pursuing enemy forces. Hart took position on a slight rise, her rifle steady despite her shaking hands. Reeves watched her through binoculars as she worked calm, methodical, each shot precisely placed. Officers fell. Machine gun nests went silent. She was buying them time, and it was costing her everything. The extraction birds came in low and fast, two Blackhawks with their miniguns hammering the enemy positions. SEALs piled aboard, dragging wounded, securing gear. Reeves counted heads, making sure everyone was accounted for. "Hart!" he shouted. "Let's go." She fired one more shot, then rose and ran for the helicopter. She was 10 meters away when enemy fire found her. Reeves saw her stumble, saw blood bloom on her left thigh, but she didn't stop. She reached the helicopter and hauled herself aboard just as the pilot lifted off. As they climbed above the valley, Reeves looked back at Corindar. Smoke and fire marked their escape route. In the distance, he could see the 3 command positions where Hart had made her impossible shots. The enemy was in disarray. Units moving without coordination, the carefully planned ambush turned into chaos. 1 woman. 3 bullets. 26 seconds. She'd saved them all. Reeves moved through the cramped helicopter to where Hart sat, a medic working on her leg wound. Her eyes were closed, her face slack with exhaustion. He knelt beside her. "Staff Sergeant Hart," he said formally, "I owe you an apology. I didn't believe in you. I should have." Her eyes opened. For a moment, they were somewhere else, seeing something he couldn't. Then they focused on him. "You were right not to trust me, Commander," she said quietly. 3 years ago, I got my whole team killed because I was too arrogant to see the bigger picture. Tonight I had a chance to do it right. You did more than right. You did the impossible." Hart shook her head slightly. "No, sir, I did what I was trained to do. What I should have been doing all along, protecting the people who depend on me." She closed her eyes again, drifting into the gray space between wakefulness and unconsciousness. The medic finished bandaging her leg through and through, nothing vital hit, and gave Reeves a thumbs up. Around them, the other SEALs were silent, watching Hart with a mixture of awe and respect. Lieutenant Webb leaned close to Reeves. "Sir, who is she? Really?" Reeves looked at the small, battered woman who'd just performed a miracle. "I don't know, Webb, but I'm going to find out." 3 weeks later, Commander Reeves stood in a Pentagon conference room, facing a panel of senior officers. His after-action report lay on the table between them, all 57 pages of it, detailing the ambush, the escape, and 3 impossible shots that shouldn't have been possible. "Let me understand this correctly," said Brigadier General Patricia Morrison, her tone skeptical. "You're claiming that Staff Sergeant Hart eliminated 3 enemy general officers in under 30 seconds, at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters, in adverse conditions, without a spotter?" "That's exactly what I'm claiming, ma'am," Reeves replied. "Because that's exactly what happened, Commander. Such shots are at the absolute limits of theoretical possibility. Even our most advanced snipers, using the best equipment, in perfect conditions, would struggle to replicate what you're describing." "I'm aware, ma'am. I've reviewed the ballistic data recorded by her rifle scope. The shots were perfect. All 3 center mass. The 3rd shot," he paused, still awed by the memory. "The 3rd shot was predictive. She fired at where the target would be, not where he was. I've never seen anything like it." General Morrison exchanged glances with the other officers. "We're familiar with Staff Sergeant Hart's background. with the Ghost Eye program, with Operation Nightfall. Then you know she was scapegoated, Reeves said bluntly. I've read the classified after-action report. Hart's team was compromised because of intelligence failures, not because of her actions. She made the shot she was assigned. It's not her fault that command didn't account for enemy quick reaction forces. Nevertheless, Morrison said carefully, the program was shut down. Hart was deemed unsuitable for operational deployment. Unsuitable? Reeves felt anger rising. General, that woman saved 32 lives. She performed under pressure that would break most trained snipers. She deserves recognition, not punishment. The room fell silent. Finally, Morrison sighed. Commander, you need to understand the political realities. Ghost Eye was controversial, expensive. When it failed, people wanted someone to blame. Hart was convenient. So she was sacrificed for bureaucratic convenience. Yes, Morrison's voice was flat, tired. But perhaps it's time to reconsider that decision. She pulled a folder from her briefcase and slid it across the table. We're reopening Ghost Eye. Not the old program, something new. Focused on precision strike capability at extreme range. We need someone to lead it. Someone with operational experience and the skill to train the next generation. Reeves opened the folder. Inside was a personnel request form, already filled out except for one line. Recommended commanding officer. You want Hart to run the new program? If she'll accept, Morrison said. And if you're willing to recommend her? Reeves didn't hesitate. He pulled out a pen and wrote Hart's name in firm, clear letters. She's the best sniper I've ever seen, General. The program would be lucky to have her. Then it's settled. Morrison collected the folder. We'll make it official pending her acceptance. She's still on medical leave? Yes, ma'am. Her leg wound was more serious than initially thought. Compound fracture. She'll be non-operational for another 6 weeks. Good. That gives us time to prepare. Morrison stood, and the other officers followed. Thank you, Commander. Your report was illuminating. As Reeves left the conference room, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It wasn't enough. It could never fully erase what Hart had been through. But it was a start, a chance for redemption. A chance for her to do what she'd always been meant to do. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. After 3 rings, Hart answered. Commander? Hart, how'd you like to be in charge of something? There was a long pause. When she spoke, her voice was careful, guarded. What kind of something? The kind that lets you train people to be as good as you are. The kind that makes sure what happened to you doesn't happen to anyone else. Another pause. I'm listening. Reeves smiled. Get yourself healed up, Staff Sergeant. When you're ready, we've got work to do. The line went quiet for so long he thought she'd hung up. Then he heard it soft, almost inaudible. She was crying. Thank you, Hart whispered. Thank you for believing in me. Thank you for proving I should, Reeves replied. Now get some rest. That's an order. He hung up and stood for a moment in the Pentagon hallway, watching officers and analysts hurry past on their way to meetings and briefings, and the endless bureaucratic machinery of war. Somewhere in a hospital room, a small woman with gray eyes was probably staring at the ceiling, processing everything that had happened. 3 years of exile, 3 impossible shots, 3 lives saved her own included. Commander Jake Reeves had been to war 17 times. He'd seen heroes and cowards, miracles and disasters, but he'd never seen anything quite like Lena Hart. And he had a feeling the world was about to learn what one woman with a rifle and a second chance could accomplish. 6 months later, Lena Hart stood in front of a small memorial wall at the new Ghost Eye training facility in Quantico, Virginia. The wall held 3 brass plaques, each engraved with a name, rank, and date of death. Sergeant Benjamin Jackson, Corporal David Morrison, Private First Class Tyler Keller. Killed in action, Operation Nightfall, 3 years prior. On the small shelf below the plaques, Lena placed 3 objects, 3 spent, .50 caliber casings, each carefully polished until it gleamed like gold. They were from Corandar Valley. From the night, she'd made 3 impossible shots and saved 32 lives. I couldn't save you, she said quietly to the names on the wall. I was so focused on the mission that I forgot the most important part, the people I was supposed to protect. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Commander Reeves appeared at her side, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one without speaking, and they stood together in silence for a moment. "I've been thinking about what you said," Lena said finally, "about redemption. And I don't think you can ever really redeem yourself for getting people killed. The guilt doesn't go away. The nightmares don't stop." She touched one of the plaques gently. "But maybe you can honor them. By making sure their deaths weren't meaningless. By using what you learned to save others. That's why you're here," Reeves said. "That's why you're training the next generation." Lena nodded. Through the window, she could see her first class of trainees on the range, 12 men and women who'd volunteered for the reconstituted Ghost Eye program. They were learning the same skills she'd mastered, the same techniques that had made her the best sniper in the military. But they were also learning something more important, that precision shooting wasn't about ego or records or impossible shots. It was about protecting the people who depended on you, about making the hard choices, about understanding that every bullet you fired carried consequences that echoed far beyond the target. "I've been offered a position at SOCOM," Reeves said casually. "Training liaison. I'd be working closely with your program." Lena looked at him, surprised. "You're giving up field command?" "I'm 47 years old. I've been shot 6 times, blown up twice, and I've had 3 concussions. My knees sound like Rice Krispies when I climb stairs." He smiled. "Besides, I figure someone needs to keep an eye on you. Make sure you don't attempt any more impossible shots." "I don't plan to," Lena said. "That's what I'm training them for." She gestured at the range. "So when the impossible shot needs to be made, there's someone ready to take it. And if they can't make it, then we find another way. Because I learned something in Corondor Valley, Commander. I learned that the impossible shot isn't the most important one. The most important shot is the one that brings everyone home." Reeves raised his coffee cup. "I'll drink to that." Lena clinked her cup against his and took a sip, still looking at the memorial wall. Jackson, Morrison, and Keller stared back from their plaques, forever young, forever frozen at the moment of their deaths. "I hope you're proud," she whispered to them. "I hope somewhere you can see what I'm doing, what I'm trying to do." The brass casings gleamed in the afternoon light, catching the sun like small golden promises. 3 men dead, 32 men saved. It wasn't balance, nothing could balance that scale. But it was something, a start, a second chance. Lena Hart had been the best sniper in the United States military. Then she'd been nothing, a cashiered failure with a red flag in her file and a past she couldn't escape. Now she was something else entirely. Not a hero, she'd never accept that word. But maybe, just maybe, she was someone who could teach others to be better than she'd been, to avoid her mistakes, to understand that in war, the most important weapon wasn't the rifle or the bullet or the impossible shot. It was the judgment to know when to pull the trigger, and the wisdom to know when not to. She turned away from the memorial and walked toward the range, where 12 eager faces waited for her next lesson. Behind her, the 3 brass casings caught the light one final time, then fell into shadow. 3 impossible shots, 26 seconds, 1 woman's redemption. And for Lena Hart, that was enough.